Hi, welcome to Tech Beyond Gender podcast. Today we are exploring a topic that many of us experience but don't always recognize. It's all about self limiting beliefs and how they quietly shape our confidence, decisions, and career growth. Joining me today is Yuliya Schamrel, an Enneagram specialist who works with individuals and teams to better understand personality patterns and the unconscious beliefs that hold us back. Now, in this conversation, we'll explore how tools like Enneagram can help women and gender diverse professionals recognize these patterns, move beyond them, and step more confidently into their true potential. Welcome, Yulia. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Meena. It's great to be here.
Cool. Now, to start with, could you briefly explain what the Enneagram is and why it's such a powerful tool in understanding ourselves?
Yes, that's a big question in itself, and there are different ways to describe it. One of the ways is that it shows 9 different ways in how we think, feel, and act, and highlight 9 motivations that exist. And what I love about the Enneagram is that neither of the motivations is better than the other one. And it's a bit like operating system. You could have Mac, you could have Microsoft, and both are great. But sometimes when they need to work together, things happen that we don't foresee. So it's a little bit like that. 9 different ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. And usually we have 2 or 3 ways that are acceptable to us, and then maybe 1 or 2 that we find difficult to be tolerant with, and difficult to communicate with. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at the Enneagram is how it shows us the box that we put ourselves in through having some beliefs that are helpful at times and can be really unhelpful in other times. And so Enneagram really is about flexibility, and it's about choice. So I can act, think, and feel how the situation requires me to do, rather than in a autopiloted trance-like way, which really happens to us before we start thinking and noticing and building self-awareness. And one other thing I'll say about the Enneagram and why I love it so much is that I started working with it 12, 13 years ago in South Africa. And there we had 11 official languages, multitude of different backgrounds, cultures, socioeconomic status, and yet people related to the Enneagram type. They saw commonalities when they shared the Enneagram type with another person, and it genuinely built tolerance and understanding. And so 9 unique ways. And I hope today we can touch upon all 9 so that we can maybe start recognizing ourselves in those descriptions. And most importantly, understanding that we are so much more than our motivation, than our personality, than our patterns, and we can choose to do something different when and how it suits us.
Oh, I just liked those terms that you used. 9 different ways of how we think, feel, and act, right? So I was also thinking like how I think, feel, and act can change so much in my lifetime, right? It's not just in
Yes.
my lifetime. The way I felt yesterday is quite different to the way I feel now. In
Mhm.
fact, the way I felt earlier today was quite different to the way I feel now. So obviously, the way I act would be influenced by the way I feel. Now, how I find it quite intriguing as to how we can actually put ourselves in these boxes, like into one of those 3 categories, just based on how I think, feel, and act, when I know that my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions keep changing constantly.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's worth mentioning that Enneagram is about motivation and not behavior. And that motivation impacts our core beliefs and our core ways of thinking, feeling, and acting a lot more sometimes that we are aware of. So, for example, the type 1 is sometimes referred to as strict perfectionist or reformist or reformer. And their motivation is to be good and to not make mistakes. And if we connect with that motivation, then of course I'm going to have to think that I need to be exacting, disciplined, I need to quality assure my work. I'm going to be vigilant about the work of other people. And I might feel anxious when I think that I'm not meeting those standards. And so this is what we're talking about. It's not about how I feel about a meeting that we had now, although you would still be quite potent in how you feel about similar situations. It's more about, in general, how do I feel in the sense of what am I paying attention to? And if we really start noticing, we will see that there are a lot more patterns that are driving our lives than we allow ourselves to believe. And sometimes they're difficult to see. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them. So that's another
Mm.
caveat of working with the Enneagram, is that it can be quite confronting, and seeing how we play out very similar stories with different people in different situations, in different workplaces. The only thing that doesn't change is us, and yet it keeps happening. So it's more global than how I feel today and what I think about a current situation, for example. Um, it's more about, what do I pay attention to when I feel, when I think, when I act.
Okay, so when you mentioned the word motivation, is it similar to values that I hold?
Mm, it is similar, and it's almost a bit deeper than that. It's a bit earlier than that. So we start being aware of values quite a bit later in our lives than we start paying attention to what we need to survive. And so the one of the flaws of, maybe not a flaw of, a human development, maybe it is that we develop critical thinking around age of 5 or 6 years old, and yet we can hear and accept statements basically from the beginning of our lives. And so if you hear something when you're 2, 3, 4, you can't tell whether the statement is true or not. You accept it as the truth because at that point, we simply don't have the tools to discern whether something is true or not. And so very often we enter our life when we can have critical thinking with a set of beliefs that we have created long time ago. And if we don't test those beliefs, they can really govern our life in a way that puts in the blind spot most of our motivation. Some families value participation, right? So if you help your siblings, you're a good person. Other families value achievement. If you achieve well at school, then I'm going to pay attention to you. Other families value maybe outgoing, extroverted behavior. And if one of the kids isn't that and they're not being valued, they are going to make some assumptions about themselves, and they're not going to be great assumptions. And so it looks into, where are we now? And in a way, it almost doesn't matter how we form those strategies, because that was the best thing we could do to survive back then. The important thing is that we're looking at it now, and now as an adult, you have a choice. We cannot rewrite our childhood. We cannot rewrite the strategies we have created, but we have more tools now. So we have access to more strategies. And so Enneagram is not about canceling something that doesn't work. It's about questioning something that doesn't work and asking myself, is there a different way for me to approach something?
Yeah, this is all awesome. So it's not like very fatalistic. So I can just talk about my upbringing as coming from India, coming from a very traditional setting where I just grew up with these values and beliefs that a woman needs to behave in a specific manner,
Mhm.
and there was some gender stereotypical values that were expected of me and behaviors, which sort of really shaped my early life. And it was only later in the life I had to really step back and just sort of think about, okay, is this serving me in any way or not? And again, working in technology in a completely different male dominated environment, you just sort of start to question certain values that you were brought up with. Now, my question to you is, did I unconsciously, without knowing what it was, sort of do for practicing any Enneagram techniques where I was just sort of taking a step back and saying, okay, what are these values, and questioning those values and ideals which I grew up with?
Yes, it's about examining and it's about self awareness. And it's quite difficult to differentiate between what I believe and what I was brought up to believe. Because as you said, if it's around us, it's really hard to discern that sometimes. And without examining and answering some quite difficult questions, it will not happen automatically. So age doesn't necessarily equal more development personally, because we can be 80 and never have asked ourselves those questions. And personally, we will be less developed than somebody who has those inquiries in an earlier age. So absolutely looking at those beliefs, asking, do they serve me? How is it working for me? Um, I've done this. Well, why? Was it the best thing I could have done today? Or was it a knee jerk reaction because every time somebody is late, I get upset, for example? So we can look at it again in this really big life decisions that we make, and also in small day to day environments. For example, am I going to avoid conflict because I'm uncomfortable? I feel intense discomfort if there's conflict around me, and therefore I will go with the flow to avoid that? Or am I going to listen to what I want and what I need and find a good way that's authentic for me to express it? So we have those micro choices every single day. And sometimes we don't make a choice at all and we just go with whatever we've done before. So choice is hard because we need to stop, question our behavior, our motivation, ask ourselves what's a better way to approach and address it. And you kind of need to be in a resourced scenario where, I've had good night's sleep. I'm not under too much stress and strain. I'm not hungry. I'm not triggering myself in this situation because I know this person is not safe for me. So it's tricky to ask oneself these questions, especially if the environment isn't perceived as a safe environment for me to self-examine. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, when it comes to these nine different motivations,
Mhm.
is it possible that a person could fall under more than one category of motivation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if we have a chance to understand or to touch upon all nine today, what you will notice is that you can easily connect to two or three of those. Um, and you might be thinking, yeah, it could be this, or it could be maybe that one. But ultimately, with the Enneagram type, we have our type that's formed really early on. And when I say early, some schools believe it happens before we are born. Others believe that it's formed by the age of 3. That's the latest that we have as our type being formed. And then what happens throughout our life, we can work with that and we can release ourselves from fatality of our Enneagram type, or we can stay with that if we don't do anything. And so you will notice that although you will be relating to two or three different types motivations, there is still a core one that that pulls you in and pulls you back. And there's a lot of structure around the Enneagram. And so there are polarities, there are descriptions of our biases and virtues of the type that also help to understand better what type we are. I think what also maybe helps to understand the complexity of the Enneagram is that it's been around for a few thousand years, because it's been an oral tradition. It's been between 2.5 and 4,000, and we don't know for sure. But it's been used in the beginning to understand the universe. There's a secret geometry of the Enneagram and a sacred geometry of the Enneagram. And so it is a genuinely ancient framework that has a lot of wisdom in it. And we can work with it either on just kind of, this is our personality, let's build some self awareness, let's build tolerance within the teams. Or we can go and work with spirituality, for example. So there are a lot of ways in how we can approach that.
Mm. So I am just having this thought. So if I take a step back and start thinking about my personality traits,
Hmm.
I could be biased, right? Like I could either be very self critical or I could be in the other end of the spectrum. Uh, and my perception about myself might not necessarily be real.
Hmm.
And also thinking about when did I form those traits? That is before I was born, or like between the age of 1 and 3, did I create those traits? I wouldn't have a clue about it. So, how does it work?
Yeah, this is a great question. I suppose the three main ways of how people identify their Enneagram type is first is through self discovery, reading Enneagram books, listening to teachers, and then trying to relate to one of the types. And as you've just mentioned, it's a tricky one because we sometimes don't see what we don't see. We have
Mm.
blind spots, and those blind spots can be pretty strong. The other way is to work with one of the Enneagram teachers from what they call narrative tradition, where they ask series of questions, and through this interview, one would then slowly decline types until we are left with one or two that are the most likely. And the third one is a questionnaire. So I personally work with the questionnaires because I work in a corporate environment, and I know that I'm not going to have time to have a 2-hour interview with somebody to establish their Enneagram type. And the questionnaires are quite smart. So you have the one that I work with is called IQ9. It has 1,200 questions in its database, and everybody starts with the same set of questions. And then after about 50 or so, it starts becoming an adaptive questionnaire where the system will start identifying what's likely, what's unlikely. And then as some types become more likely, the questions become more targeted and granulated towards distinguishing between those types. And so an individual comes out with a report, and that report then helps and guides them with their development. Again, it's always better to work with a coach when you work with something that complex, and still, even in the report level, even just from being aware of my patterns of behavior, thinking and feeling, I can already gain a lot at that point. So three ways. There's a long one and there's a short one. The shorter
Mm.
one is the questionnaire. The longer one is can be years of self-discovery. And sometimes I meet people at the conferences who've been reading about the Enneagram for 20 years and they're still going, oh, am I a 2 or am I a 4? I don't quite know. So it can take a long time through that kind of understanding.
Yeah, it is very intriguing. Now, so when you meant the questioners, right? So there is an algorithm-based judgment, is it, behind the scenes? Or is there a specialist, or is there a person who sort of finally comes to a conclusion that you are a 1 or a 3 or a 5? Or is it just based on some logic behind my computer, which sort of decides, okay, based on all of your responses, this is what you are.
Yes, so it's an algorithm that works with identifying which type the person lands with. And again, the a great thing about the Enneagram is that we have all 9 types within ourselves. So we have a type 1 trait, we have a type 2 trait, we have a type 3 trait. Our core type would have a more solid representation, and it will be there when we are tired, it will be there when we are sick, it will be there when we are good and we are bad. So it's almost like in what they say in the wedding vows, that's when your Enneagram type, it's always with you. But we have all 9. And so sometimes in a questionnaire, you see the exact distribution of how different types resonate with an individual. So again, it's a, of course, self questionnaire. It's not a 360 where other people evaluate person's behavior. But then again, Enneagram is about motivation and not behavior. And so it's not up to anybody to tell anybody else what their Enneagram type is. And so when we work with the questionnaire, my first question is always, how does the type suggested in the questionnaire resonates for you? And I'm open to the idea that it might not resonate, because a human being is always going to be more complex and 3D than even the cleverest questionnaire can detect. It does have 95% accuracy, so I'm pretty happy with those odds. And I'm open that it just might not fit, and that's okay. Then we have a discussion and understand what does.
Hmm. Now I'm really keen and intrigued to know more about the 9 different motivation traits
Mhm.
and how to identify them. You can just go one at a time. All yours.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I was reflecting on your your mission of the organization, and how we have these limiting beliefs and how we can work with them. So I thought maybe what I'll do when describing a type to talk about the gifts of the type, because all types have gifts. And then what happens if we start to over rely on those gifts? Because every single strength that we have can become a liability if we use it too much. And so sometimes working with the Enneagram is understanding the balance at which point my strengths starts becoming a liability for me, and how I can do something differently. So I'll start with the type 1 because it's type 1.
Mm.
And within the Enneagram, there are also centers of intelligence, which is a feeling center, thinking center, and a body center that we all have. And as much as I want to talk about it, it is another podcast probably in itself. So I'm going to start working with the types, but I would say that type 1 sits within the body types. And so what it means is that you are likely to viscerally feel the things that I'm going to describe. So I can feel it in my body. So as a body type, a lot of being processed through that. And so, as I said before, type 1 sometimes is being referred to as a reformer, a strict perfectionist, and their motivation is to be good and to not make mistakes. And so, if we think about their strengths and the gifts, they are extremely conscientious and ethical. If I work with organizations and they don't have type 1 in their exec teams, I ask myself, who is doing the ethical bit? Because it comes naturally for those people. They have very high standards, and usually they have higher standards for themselves than they have for anybody else. And so their work is always quality, it's delivered on time, and they're often used as an example of what good looks like. And then, of course, if we take those qualities and we think about, well, what happens if we overdo those? Well, what happens is instead of driving for perfection, which in itself is not always good, I start fearing making a mistake. And so instead of being excited about doing a good thing, I start being worried about doing a bad thing. And so very often, ones talk about how they have insomnia, they struggle to fall asleep because they keep thinking through the scenarios and what could happen if they make a mistake. And very often it is so unrelated to what is actually happening that it's very unlikely that it could take place. And yet it's very real for them. Another bit of it is that when we have really high standards of ourselves, they kind of do spill onto other people. And so often type 1 can find people giving them feedback that they've been critical. And it's very difficult for them to recognize them because they think, well, everybody wants to do better, right? Like, surely every person wants to improve. And so I am going to tell them how to improve themselves or how to improve their work, which of course can be perceived as criticism. And so what you also find quite often is that ones find it very difficult to delegate. Because if I delegate work, what are the chances of this person doing a good thing? And so what we often have is an overworked individual who people perceive as being critical. And so the work here for our types 1 is to understand what is actually good enough. What is 100% here and not 120? And actually, do I need to give 100% every single time? Or can I oscillate? And can these be done at 80%? And these things be done at 100%? And allow themselves to be human and to make a mistake now and then. So that's type 1. And I think in women, in the industries that are not represented by women well, there's this extra layer of, and I'm a woman. So if I make a mistake, it's going to reflect badly on all women in the field. And so again, for somebody of this type, that additional pressure can be real. So that's something that I will
Gosh,
say.
you just described me, Yuliya. You just described me.
Welcome. Welcome to the
Uh,
club of beautiful ones who bring so much to the world and they're so hard on themselves. So what I always want is just to give a hug to one representative because they don't do that enough themselves. They're so good at so many things and they're the last person to see it in themselves. So that's a one. That's a one.
Now what? What do I do next? I am
Now,
type 1.
what do you do? Well, it's a genuine inquiry about, is it true? I cannot make a mistake. Is it true? What will actually happen if you make a mistake? So understanding that, it's also about noticing when in my body I'm starting to get tense, right? So usually, especially before somebody who is of type 1 is about to react to something. And it could be that unforeseen change of plans, somebody is delivering work that is not up to standard. They usually start feeling it in their body because, again, as I said, it's a body type. Sometimes the tightness is so bad that ones actually have chronic neck pain and shoulders pain because it's like I contract myself and then I forget to relax.
Mm.
And so, first of all, go to go have a massage and a sauna. So that's the first one. And secondly, recognize when it starts happening because usually our body reacts to something first. And if you can
Mm.
catch that, that's what we do is we take a deep breath and maybe a sip of water and allow ourselves to not act, think or say anything for 5 seconds. And then check in and see, well, is it actually necessary? And it seems like, of course, I breathe. We all breathe. But so often we don't breathe well. Sometimes as human, we can carry on for the entire day and we haven't taken one proper breath, right? And so having this conscious moment before I activate myself and before I propel myself into a comment that is going to be unhelpful or an action or putting my hand up to say, oh, I'll just fix this. That happens often for once. Just don't do anything. And remembering that we are already coming in with value that is presupposed, that is completely independent of us doing or not doing anything. So as a person, we already have value. And that's why we're allowed to make mistakes. That's why we're allowed to not be somewhere on time. And it's about self-compassion first. Yeah.
Awesome.
Breathe in and out. And ask
Yeah.
yourself, is it true? Is it actually true what I'm telling myself? It's going to be so
Mm,
horrible. What if I offend somebody? Yeah, what will happen then? Probably
mm,
nothing.
mm.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that's our ones. Two. So two sometimes is referred to as a considerate helper, and the motivation is to be loved and appreciated. And so they come with the warmth and empathy and compassion. And it's almost like they have this secret gift to see somebody else's need before this person themselves can see their need, and they're right there to help them. And so they're there for other people, and they feel valuable when they're dependable, when they're reliable, and when they're there for others. And of course, again, if we take this strength to the point where it becomes a liability, it can translate to lack of self care. It can translate to saying yes to too many things. And, um, and actually, boundaries that are so fuzzy that people can start feeling uncomfortable. So, for example, in the leadership space, what I often see is somebody who's a leader in a type two and they go on leave, everything crumbles, everything just falls down. And they're like, but why is it happening? Well, that's because you're doing everything. And so, of course, when you stop doing everything for other people, they don't know what's going on. And when I work with top twos, they kind of have this false abundance. They say yes, and they look like they can genuinely handle it. They usually look quite relaxed. They have a smile on their faces. And so when somebody says, "Oh, you're fine. Can you please help me?" It's extremely difficult for them to say no. And this is where again it's motivation, not behavior. Sometimes we behave too like when we're parents, when we're looking after small kids, we kind of have to look after their needs before they ask us for something. But that's different. That's my role. That's my role as a mother. That's not my motivation as a human being. And so, whilst the qualities of a type 2 sometimes can be associated as more feminine qualities, when you look at the distribution of different types, there actually isn't a huge um, a huge skew in data between men and women of type 2. Um, so, inability to say no is something that stems from this belief that if I'm not helpful, if I'm not the one who can fix everything, then who am I? Right. And so, um, what I often find is that if individuals who are type 2 just stop volunteering for things, I'm not even saying say no, I'm asking stop volunteering. They already
mm,
notice how much comes off their plate because they are the ones who are there. They want to help. And so very often they end up doing things that are not in their job description. Nobody is expecting them to do, and yet there they are. And so it's fine to do it now and then. But if this is a pattern of behavior, it's a real recipe for a burnout. And so, really important to check in with oneself. And mostly when I work with type 2, I work with kind of no is a full sentence. Stop volunteering. How can you say no in a way that feels authentic for you? Um, and it's tricky because imagine if you have somebody in your life that always says yes. They are your rock when you need them. They never seem to mind if you ask them for help. If they start changing, you're going to be like, oh, what got onto you? And so sometimes it's also quite difficult to get out of our patterns because they're kind of useful for people around us. It's convenient for me if you look after my needs. It's convenient for me as a leader if you volunteer for anything I offer. It's convenient for me as your employee if you are not going to have a constructive feedback conversation with me because you want to be seen as loving and supportive. So quite often people can really explore our patterns of behavior, thinking and feeling to benefit them. And so when they stop getting that, our people who working on themselves can feel like, oh, but I'm not as likable anymore. And it can be hard to continue with that work. So it's not easy. It is not easy when you believe that your value stems from you being there for other people to suddenly start focusing on your own needs and self care and listening to your body and understanding when to say no. Yeah.
I can relate some of the traits from two as well now.
Mm,
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
yes. And that's what is so valuable about the Enneagram is that we all have all 9 types within ourselves. And
Mm.
it's easier to relate to other people. Right. So type 3, slightly kind of slightly different because yes, there's a need to still be appreciated, but it's more about to be recognized and respected for my achievements. And so we have somebody who is ambitious, goal oriented, capable. They kind of the get shit done kind of people. Lots on the go and looking good during that. So for type 3, they are very sensitive to the image they put out to the world. And sometimes not even consciously, but they almost have this radar to understand what is seen as successful in this environment. And I'm going to be that. And so ambitious, they appear very competent. They read the corporate dynamic well, and so they often are in a leadership role too. Um, and they're very goal oriented. So the goals are important to them. And if somebody or something stands in the way of achieving the goal, they would know about it because they will feel somebody being abrupt with them, open and honest. I love this phrase when people use it to just not be nice. And they really are great at working really hard and achieving things. Um, what they are not great at is stopping, slowing down, and recognizing that they're not what they do. So if we think about type 3, it's very difficult for them to not identify with their work. And so when they're doing well, that's great because, oh, I'm doing well at work, so I am a successful person. But what if they're made redundant? And sometimes through no action of their own. Um, redundancy is hard for any Enneagram type, but for type 3, because their self-worth is so connected to the outward image of others see, it can be really devastating. And another kind of section of life where threes really struggle is when they retire, because so much of their identity is meshed together with what they do, that I'm a human doing and not a human being. And now that I stop doing, who am I? So again, this is a type that can get quite thrown by retirement because now that identity of me is not there anymore. Um, and so this is a tricky type to coach because what they do is recognized by organizations. Who wouldn't like an employee who is goal oriented, working 14 hours a day, don't need vacations because they don't take the holiday because they have their eyes on the prize and they're not going to deviate. And so it's really interesting. Wherever I work as a coach in organizations, I know for a fact that by helping this individual to slow down, to start inviting other areas of their life in the mix of what good is and what success is, I'm kind of working against that organization because they're not going to get somebody who is there 14 hours a day. But actually, it still works out for everybody because this person can be sustainably successful for longer. Right. So type 3s, again, like type 2s, are strong candidates for burnout because in that need to achieve, need to succeed in the drive, they very often ignore their well-being, they ignore their bodies, they ignore their sleep. They sometimes over-exercise because I still need to look good. So they would sleep 4 hours a day, but they will be in the gym at 5 a.m. And so you can imagine how it's a cocktail for for burnout. And so slowing down, recognizing one's value as a human being and not necessarily a human doing, while the world out there rewards this behavior, can be tricky. Right. So this is why change is hard, because it's not only about changing myself, it's about being okay that the way that I'm perceived by others is also going to change, because I will not do what they're expecting me to do. Right. So yeah, so that is type 3. And you can already kind of see how somebody who is type 1, who want to do the right thing and not make mistakes, working with type 3, who just want to achieve the goal. And even if we have to cut corners now and then, you know, it's for the
Yeah.
greater good. They already can have quite a big value clash there, right? And so again, this is why Enneagram and teams is so important, because I can almost tell the team what issues that are experiencing by looking at the Enneagram types in a team, and that gives them voice to say, "Oh, yeah, actually, you know what? I do notice it. It does happen." So that's a really good way of seeing how it's not personal. Our motivations collide. Let's work it out.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's type 3. Then we have type 4, and type 4 is referred to as the intense creative, the individualist, romantic, a completely different motivation and how it shows to the world. So for them, the core desire is to be authentic and to find meaning. And so that search for meaning and authenticity means that they're very introspective. They're connected to their inner world and especially their feeling. They often identify with their feeling in a way that if I feel sad, the world is the saddest place it can be. If I feel inspired, then the world is full of possibilities. So a lot of how they are depends on how they feel. And they're artistic and they're creative. And of course, every type can be creative, but often for a 4, it's that outlet to authenticity and creativity. And it can show up in different ways. Sometimes they say, oh, I change my room decor every week to suit how I feel. Um, I was coaching a client who was coding codes. That's a very technical term here. And he said, oh, I just created the most beautiful code. It was the most beautiful code anybody has ever seen. So again, the beauty doesn't necessarily need to be in painting, music, art. It can be how do I take something that's mundane and make it really different, make it beautiful. The downside of that is that when I want to feel unique and suddenly people understand me, then maybe I'm not that unique. And so they very often struggle with the feeling of belonging. They feel like they don't belong. And at the same time, if they're honest with themselves, quite often they get to the step where they would almost belong to a group and then they push away. And so very often in a 4 dynamic, you have this push pull where I want to be understood, but then if I'm understood, I'm not unique anymore. And that introspection also comes with quite quite a dark view of themselves often. So if somebody, say, if your employee is type 4 and you're doing a yearly assessment with them and you've noted 5 areas where they excel and 1 area for improvement, if your employee is type 4, they will remember this 1 area for improvement and they'll make it much worse than what you told them. And if somebody asks, so how was your appraisal, they'll say, oh, it was horrible. I think yeah, I think I'm gonna be fired because it was so bad. Whereas actually, the balance was really different reality-wise. So you can see how, when we talk about the pattern of feeling and thinking, so that's what I'm talking about. It's the pattern of seeing the worst rather than the best. It's the pattern of valuing authenticity over belonging or over convention. And so type fours are very rarely in a corporate space. So when I started working with the Enneagram, fair enough, I worked in a kind of sales driven organization. And by the time I conducted 650 questionnaires and coaching sessions and interviews, I had one type four in that entire group.
Wow.
However, when I did a coaching course where there were coaches and therapists, and we had 100 people, I had 32 that resonated with type 4. And so sometimes it's not that a type 4 cannot be in a corporate space, it's just that they're happier in a place where they can have this individuality and work with feelings and emotions and where it's valued. And so very often they're in creative industries if they're in the corporate world, or working for themselves, because it's just the thought of being a number in a machine is something that they would find really tricky. And so for type 4, it's about how do I value acting and doing something and thinking just as much as I value my feeling? And how do I examine whether I'm feeling something and therefore it's true, or I'm feeling something and it has nothing to do with reality? And it's very tricky. So that inquiry of is it true is very important for our types 4, and also getting out of that thinking and feeling loop, because they're very good at imagining and they're very good at fantasy, and so they often create a plan and they think about it in so much vivid detail and they feel it so beautifully and richly that I actually don't have to do anything. I already got my dopamine from thinking and feeling about it. And so very often they have this really creative, great plans, but they don't get them into life because, well, I kind of got what I was, what I wanted from this plan. And so I don't have to
Mhm.
do that. Yeah. So again, very different. And usually type fours recognize themselves. Like it's a type that's not mistyped very often. You're either that or
Mhm.
you're not. You either recognize it in yourself or not. Um, then we're moving to the thinking center. So the 2, 3, and 4 types were from the feeling center. And so that motivation is connected to how others perceive me. So we talked about, am I loved and appreciated? Am I regarded and respected? Am I seen as unique and authentic? So all of that is quite other reference, because that's what our feeling center does. It kind of see like, well, how do others see me? Am I a good person? Whereas the next, the thinking center, it's more about preoccupation of how do I create safety and direction for myself. And so these are kind of motivations are related to creating safety. And so type 5, they're called the observer, the quiet specialist, the investigator. For them, motivation is to understand and to conserve resources. So if I understand how things work, I will be safe. And so they are the most cerebral type of the Enneagram, process everything through their brain. And if you ask type 5, how do you feel about something? They will start their response with, I think, I feel. So the thing
Mhm.
is so huge for them. So they're analytical, insightful, just because they look at things for longer. And they are one of the few types that learn for the sake of learning. So we all can love learning. And for example, myself, I always learn something, but I'm type 8. That's a very action oriented type. So I learn so I can implement. I learn that I can change something. For a 5, I learn because I just want to know. It doesn't matter to me if there's no practical application to what I've learned. I just want to know. And so
Yeah.
different kind of relationship with why is it that we learn. And that's again why Enneagram is about motivation and not behavior. Any type can have thirst for learning, but we will have different motivation behind why we do that. Um, they are very strategic, and because they are quite detached from their emotions, it's easier for them to make this analytical decisions, a kind of the greater good. They're good systemic thinkers because they A, think about things for longer than others usually, and B, take it into consideration without preferencing how I feel about something. So they're going to be likely more objective when decision making than other types. However, of course, when we are disconnected from our feelings, it's difficult for us to be empathetic. So the core of empathy is that I recognize the emotion in myself, and now I know how you feel, and I can be empathetic. And so if I don't recognize emotion in myself because it's just not something I pay attention to, I can't be empathetic. So very often fives get the feedback that they're not empathetic or they're not feelers. But actually they are feelers, but they just need to create space between the event and their processing of their emotions. And another marker for a five, and that's where usually you would know if you're a type five or not, is that need to conserve energy, time, resources. So whereas type 2 says yes to everything, type 5 almost think like, okay, I have a full tank in the beginning of the day, and every interaction takes things out of my tank, even pleasant one. And if I don't have things in my tank, something bad will happen. And so sometimes they would seem rude when they will go like, okay, I'm going. But they actually genuinely believe that if they don't leave right now, they will run out of energy and bad things will happen again. And for mothers, it's really difficult because as a parent, you're meant to want to spend all your time in the world with your kids because you love them so much. But if your core type is type 5, you still need a space to recover. You need time to recover so that you can be a better mom and a better worker and co-worker. But our society sometimes doesn't recognize that. What, you don't want to spend time with your kids all your waking hours of the day? And so very often they carry around this guilt of, I need time to recharge, I need space so that I can be a better person. But it's sometimes quite difficult to sell in the what world sees as a good place. And so for type 5, it's really good to connect with their body and in a way that is maybe a team sport or not running, because that's where I can think even more. So anything that gets you out of thinking. Um, Tai Chi is good. Team sports are good. Anything, dancing is beautiful for fives because that kind of how I can connect to my emotional center through connecting with my body. And usually they're quite disconnected. They wouldn't know sometimes. I had a client who said, well, my wife put alarm for my phone so I know when to eat when I'm working on something exciting. Because when I'm in the research mode, I can go for 18 hours and I won't even get out of my desk. So that's kind of needs, the needs of our body quite often I put on a back burner because my mind is more important than that. So yeah, if somebody recognizes themselves in that description, I'll say, sign up for a Samba class or a Zumba class where there's little thinking, but a lot of moving and connecting with the movement. That's
Or even meditation for that matter, I would imagine, right?
well, meditation is tricky for thinking types because they
Oh,
sometimes can think more. So if they can do true meditations, again, meditation is great for every type, but sometimes if I already think too much, will I think even more in a meditation space? Or can I quiet my mind and connect with my body? So I would say when meditation is done well, yes. If while I'm meditating, actually what I'm doing is I'm just going through every single thought in my head, then it can put us even more in that pattern than out of that. But again,
yeah.
meditation done well is good for any any time. But maybe like a walk-in meditation for a five, just to get out of their mind and connect with their body. So that's our fives. Type 6 is a type that is probably getting a lot of judgment in the workplace because so they are called the loyal skeptic. And they are very oriented to what can be risky and how we can mitigate things. And so they're really good at noticing patterns, and they're very good at creating safety protocols and safety plans. So if something goes wrong, I will have plan A and B and C, and they're magnificent in crisis. So when crisis happens, because they've already foreseen it, they remain calm and they have a plan. But what happens very often is that in a team, people start relying on them to be that kind of black hat thinker and to see, well, what if something goes wrong? Everybody rolls their eyes like, oh, not you again. We're having this wonderful idea and you're bringing this kind of thinking, which is so needed. But sometimes people almost delegate that to that person. Well, you're good at risk assessment, so why don't you do that? But when you bring your thoughts to us, we're going to mock you for being a wet blanket. So very often that's the dynamic that happens for sixes. So people appreciate the fact that they have this ability to really assess the risks. But very rarely they say a genuine thank you when our sixes bring it to the world. And so it can really feel that, I'm being reliable here. I'm doing one for the team, but my foreseeing problems are seen as me being negative rather than actually doing what you asked me to do. And so they're called loyal skeptic because they're very loyal. And a lot of sixes have friends from primary school that they stay in touch with. And sometimes they stay with the jobs they shouldn't be staying on for like extra 5 years because of their loyalty. But I also can be skeptical because if I'm loyal to something, I need to know that I can trust you. And so very often they feel a lot of doubt and a lot of questioning of even the smallest decisions, because every time I say yes to something, I say no to something else. And it can be, it can be small, but it's still quite taxing. So for example, I need to be at the conference tomorrow at 9 a.m. and it's not where I usually drive. And so for me, I will maybe check how long it usually takes, an hour. I'll leave an hour and a half earlier, so I'm there on time. For a type 6, it could be, okay, well, what if something happens? So should I take a train? Like, if I take a car, I'll need to find a parking. If I arrive at this time, would the parking be available? If it's not available, what am I going to do? And so the planning can take really a long time, but only one possibility can happen. And so in a way, it's that planning for things is great, but when we plan for 10 possibilities of something, we know only one of them will be true. And so sometimes there's a lot of space that's spent planning for something that never happens. And that's what often happens for type 6. And then also it can bring to being indecisive because I can see how things can go wrong. So I'd rather not make a decision at all than make a wrong one. A really kind of tentative sometimes in individuals in how the language sometimes shows up. So if you would ask a type 6, so do we go with option A or option B? They are likely to say, well, I suppose option B might be a better option, but at the same time, so there's kind of there's this tentative quality to the language, which sometimes can be seen as them not being confident, but it's not that. It's me working through what can go wrong and then coming up with a better decision. So that's type 6. Okay, who's next? 7. 7 is the enthusiast and enthusiastic visionary sometimes. So they're so different from a type 6 in their behavior because they want to experience it all. And so their motivation is to experience it all and to avoid pain. And so just as type 6 has option A, B, and C for when things go wrong, type 7 has option A, B, C, D when things get boring. And so sometimes they say, well, if I have a meeting with friends in the restaurant, I am not going to order starter and a main course. I'll just do one thing because if I don't like it, I can leave a bit earlier. Or if I go to the movies, I'm not going to buy popcorn because if I don't like the movie, I want to be able to walk out. Or in my role, I want to see progress. I want to see something different. If things are the same, even if they're good, but they're the same, I'm going to start getting some itchy feet and I want to have something different going on for me. And so it's a really positive kind of behavior wise type. Um, but that avoidance of pain and discomfort sometimes can bring to them not noticing the issues that are going on until they're so big that it's impossible not to notice. And what was easy to address a few months ago now becomes this genuine item of concern and discomfort. And sometimes that need for new things, the new ideas, can be experienced by others as impulsivity. So they're called enthusiastic visionary because sevens are like idea generators. They're entrepreneurs. A lot of sevens have multiple degrees in different areas because they start studying something and then something else catches their eye and then something else catches their eye. When I run certification courses, 20% of the class usually are type sevens because they want to know it's exciting, it's cool, I want to be engaged in that. But it also means that very often they don't follow through. So they will do the training, but they won't do the doing because they just wanted to have that buzz of learning something and not the mundane process of implementing something or following up. And so often seven leaders freak their people out because they throw ideas in the meeting. Go, oh, let's see, maybe we can do this, or we can do that. And your ones and twos are sitting there going, okay, who is going to do that? Do we have roles and responsibilities, timelines, protocols, rules? Whereas all they're doing, the sevens, they're going like, oh, we're just having fun visualizing something. And so very often seven leaders just need to preempt that and say, hey, I'm going to throw some ideas, but you're not expected to do them. We're just going to select one of them. So small things like that can really change the dynamic, because very often that enthusiasm is being rewarded with promotions. So very often see seven leaders in workplace in different industries, in tech, in engineering, in sales, because they have this energy of let's do it, let's go for it. And usually they have ones and twos and threes, and they seem to actually take it forward. So if you have a bunch of seven coming together, you're going to have fantastic ideas and maybe even a strong start. But then up to 40%, things will fizzle out because they are idea people, they're generators, they're not doers. So again, massive value, but knowing where that value brings in, and can be really distracted. So what's new? They usually have 27 tabs open on their computers and they're jumping from one thing to another. And so for them, like, this is where again meditation is important, but it's not connecting with my thoughts meditation because they already do it. It's connecting with my feelings. It's connecting with discomfort. It's recognizing when I want to avoid something, understand why I want to avoid it, and actually go into that. Very often, seven leaders avoid difficult conversations at all cost. So somebody could be doing something and they will maybe ask their HR person to address it, or they'll say, oh, it's not so bad. It's actually, yeah, it's not great, but so very often they just want to avoid conflict, not because they feel personal discomfort of the conflict with another human being. It's just because it's a bit of a painful experience and I don't want to do that. And so quite often that's where the biggest leadership edge is for sevens, is to recognize that, look, painful stuff is a part of life. And if I don't allow myself to be in it, I'm actually also missing out on a quite important experience. And following through. So there's a freedom and follow through. And very often sevens I've seen this dynamic so many times. A seven leader will have a one or a two as their second in command for that person to follow through. And again, yes, it is a strategy, but it's probably not a good strategy in the long term. So we can't delegate everything we don't want to do forever if we want to be a good, rounded individual and a leader. And so that needs to follow through discipline to start something and to finish something that is really useful and helpful for our sevens. So 8, active controller, sometimes called the challenger, protector, and the core desire is to be in control, which means that nobody else can control me. So it's about protecting and be in control. And so type 8 individuals are bold, they're decisive, they, again, other people see them as assertive, sometimes intimidating, but it's a blind spot for them. This is how I'm just am. I'm not assertive. It's just how I am. But they definitely have this presence and the need to be in control of the situation, in control of the resources, control of the room. And very often, if there is a space that's not quite filled by leadership, aides step in. So very often they find themselves in leadership roles because nobody else wanted to do that, or because there was a leader, but the aide didn't think that it's a good example of leadership. And so they're just like, yeah, I'll take over. So there's a certain kind of understanding that if somebody is unhappy, they will tell me about it. And if they're not telling me about it, then we're all good. So that motivation to be in control means that I cannot show weakness, means that I need to be strong. I cannot show vulnerability. And so often is I cannot show vulnerability to others, but also I cannot show vulnerability to myself. So often it can be as bad as not noticing a health condition. A lot of aides end up with heart attacks because they just ignore it. Oh, high blood pressure, whatever. But it's not whatever. It's just not a very good way of always kind of being in that fight mode. And so when, we talk about the fight or flight mode when we're under stress, usually aides are kind of in a preliminary fight mode just in case. So they're ready. They're there to protect other people and they're there to control resources. And that protection is also interesting because often people don't ask to be protected. And so there can be a bit of a conflict with other people feeling like they're being overbeared by this protection that they never asked for in the first place. But again, there's this gift of justice, there's a gift of courage, there's real drive for things to be fair. So fairness and justice is a really big thing for eights. With the caveat is that what they think is fair and what they think is just, which is not always what objectively is right and fair. And so on a kind of the flip side, that assertiveness can come through as being intimidating and confrontational. And a fight mode is not always the best option. So that's where we need to have a little bit of range where we can do other things. And that aversion to vulnerability actually sometimes makes it difficult for people to relate to their leader because they say, well, you're like a superhuman. I don't need to ask you if you need help. I don't need to be kind to you because you've got it. So very often they're seen as somebody who's got it together. And very often they don't because nobody always has it together all the time. So I like that visual for type 8. It's a marshmallow in a barbed wire. So what people see is that barbed wire exterior, but what actually is inside is this really soft heart, and they want to be there for others. They want to protect people. They want for things to go well and to be just. And not always it comes through their behavior. So behavior can be quite abrupt. There's 360 feedback often shows, people find you intimidating. People find you confrontational. You are very protective over your team. So very often eights would protect their team even if they're in the wrong, because it's important for them to be that kind of person who is protective and holding the fort. And the irony is that when we show our vulnerability and weakness to others, we actually become stronger because we have more people on board. We have people who want to do something for us because they can see that, wow, you're a real person with real challenges that we all have, and I'm here for it. And so for eights, it's really important to, in small ways, to start in a really safe environment, to open up, to be vulnerable, to be open, to be receptive to other ideas, and to admit when they are wrong. It's difficult for everybody to admit when they're wrong, but for a type 8 who can perceive it as weakness, it's even harder. And so if they can find the small ways of how can I show my vulnerability in a way that feels safe for me? How can I change my mind? How I can allow myself to not always be the strongest person in the room? How can I allow myself to not be in charge? So all those questions are really good inquiries for an age, and also slowing down. So again, very few aides will meditate because they just like, let's move it. I need to do something. And if they can do it, it's extremely, extremely valuable. And then the last type of the Enneagram, type 9, again, so different from an 8. They're called adaptive peacemaker, sometimes referred to as the mediator. Their core desire is to create harmony and to be in peace. So I need to be at peace with myself and with the world. And to do that, I am going to be accepting. I'm going to be supportive of others. I'm going to be open to other people's points of views. And, it's up to me to make sure that I can create harmony in the world. And so quite often, nines end up in a leadership position because people come to them and shoulder tap them and say, hey, you need to become a leader because people like to be around you. And they often feel imposter syndrome because they don't think that they are the best person for a role. And very often they allow everybody else to have a voice, and then they forget to give themselves that opportunity as well. So practically often what happens is a meeting, everybody has opinions, and none will be drawing it out and they say, hey, Meena, what do you think? And if nobody asks them directly, what do you think? They're not going to say anything. So that need to kind of go with the flow, to be there for other people, to avoid conflict at all cost, is something that very often gets nines in that almost kind of trance-like state where I am not going to experience strong emotions. So I'm not going to get super sad, but I'm not going to get extremely happy either. So it kind of, in a way, I'm creating harmony by not wanting too much, right? If I don't want too much, then I don't need to assert myself. And so it shows up in smallest places like, oh, what do you want for dinner? Would you like Thai or Greek? Well, I don't know. What would you like? So that would be a 99% response from a nine space. And again, it's harmful. It's a little bit harmful when we always do that. But when we start doing it in the workplace and in our life, always, it seems all right for other people, but we are saying no to ourselves in small and big ways. And so wherever we don't question whether I'm saying yes because I want to do something, I'm saying yes to avoid conflict, or I'm saying yes to be a likable person, we run a risk of doing something that actually is not good for us, either in the short run or in the long run. And so again, they're so likable because they're genuinely there for other people, and they're genuinely supportive, and they're genuinely wanting to know how you feel and what you think. But that kind of passive outlook on what I want and what I need can sometimes result in being stubborn. and in procrastinating because, well, I said yes, but I don't actually want to do it. So I'm going to procrastinate. So kind of a marker for a 9 is that procrastination. Before I know I should do my taxes, but I'm going to arrange my cupboards in colors. I'm going to color code my cups. So I'll do something that's different from what I actually need to do. So that always often happens because that's not my thing in the first place. I don't want to do it, but I said yes to that because I didn't want to say no. And so even already, appreciate being new to the Enneagram. There's like a lot of information going on, but you could probably hear how the 2
Yeah.
behavior of the helper can be mistaken with the 9 behavior of the peacemaker because both types don't want to have conflict, but for different reasons. So types 2 avoid conflict because they want to maintain relationship. They want to be likable. They want to be dependable for that person. Type 9 avoids conflict because they just don't like conflict. So it's very different. For type 2, it's relational. For type 9 is that I just want to not be at peace. So it's same behavior, different motivation. The same, for example, 3 and 8. Both types are very action oriented. They're very achievement driven, and they can be quite blunt with people if they get into their way. But threes are still going to be way more diplomatic. They are going to play the corporate game. They are going to get to their way, not necessarily by hitting the wall through, but to find a way around it. Whereas eights would do it with slightly more um, collateral damage around them and kind of more direct and with more career limiting moves than a 3 do. So again, because my motivation as an 8 is I want to control the situation. For a 3, I just want to achieve the goal. I don't have to control it as long as my goal is achieved. For an 8, I have to be in control. But behaviorally, it can look very similar. And so that understanding motivation, understanding that I'm acting from my type and not from what is good and right for me is a game changer. And it's very difficult to do. It's difficult to do at the moment. And so it's almost like training wheels on a bike. So trying these new strategies is better if it's a kind of low risk, fail safe scenario. Don't try it in a board meeting for the first time. Try it somewhere where you know that even if it doesn't work out, you're still good. And like anything, any new habit, we need to create those neural pathway in our brain to even allow the possibility of this happening. So when we're changing behavior, the first 5, 6 times, it's going to feel clunky and horrible and cringy, and this is not me. And yet, if we stay with that, then it can become part of our repertoire, and then I can do it, or I can do something different. So when we're not too grounded in one way of doing something, we have choice, and when we have choice, we're more likely to make a right one. And so it's almost like I can see the world through a window and it's this big. But if I allow myself to release my structures a little bit and to soften them, then my windows through which I see the world can become bigger and bigger and bigger. And I have more strategies available to me and more options available to me. And so, in a way, it almost doesn't matter. Like knowing your Enneagram type is the very beginning of working with the Enneagram. And then you have a lifetime of trying new things and seeing how different ways of acting, feeling, and thinking can be beneficial in different
Yeah.
scenarios.
I can really feel that this is just a Enneagram 101, and I can completely understand and appreciate why you have such a long questionnaire as well.
Hmm.
Because humans are complex and it is not easy to capture them and categorize them right in a specific motivation type. Now, for someone listening to this podcast who feels that they're constantly questioning their abilities, what would be the first step you would recommend?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I would firstly, I think it's very tempting to say that it's an individual and they just need to work with themselves, because it's not just individual, right? I can question my abilities because they've been questioned by other people, and I feel like I need to assert
Mm,
myself or prove myself every second day. There is also that layer of environment makes, adds why I'm doing this, right? Um, but again, understanding myself and knowing when something is true or not true, that comes from groundedness and really seeing myself for who I am. So kind of seeing my abilities and my strengths and my challenges clearly. And so the first step, if working with the Enneagram, I would say, run a questionnaire, read it, and see which area of your life will benefit the most from changing one of those things. From kind of that questioning, I would ask whose thought is it, right? So in your head, you have a voice, and it goes, "Huh, that's just not good enough." Like, pause there and ask, whose voice is it? Most of the time, it's not yours. It could be, I don't know, your grandmother who's been dead for 50 years. Like, we just have this collection of ideas. Like, maybe it's my, I don't know, PE teacher who said, oh, not good enough. It's really important to discern who is saying that? Why am I letting something from X amount of years ago to even have space in my head? And almost thinking about it as, like if you look at your phone, how many times have you updated your phone since the cell phones came to life? Like, I don't even call cell phones anymore, right? Showing my age here. But we don't
mm,
update our mental models, right? We
mm,
just walk around with the same mental models that half of them are not even ours. Half of them were gifted to us as a gift we didn't
mm,
have capacity to not receive. We could not refuse it when we got it. And so I think that self-examination of, is it me or is it someone else? And also, if it is persistent enough and if it has enough negative impact on one's life, I would definitely say working with a coach or a therapist to look into that, because by ourselves, we cannot solve the issues that we have created
mm,
sometimes. So I would say if it's light and happens now and then, I think an individual can themselves address it through this inquiry of whose is it? Is it mine? Is it somebody else's? Is it true? But if it is an ongoing pattern, they would need somebody else to even ask those questions and to give them space. There are so many people who have never had given themselves or by others time and space to reflect on, how do you think the way you think? How do you feel
mm.
the way you feel? How do you actually feel? Like, what is your pattern? What have you noticed? What is the first thing that happens when you are in a conflict? What is the second thing that happens for you when you're in a conflict? How many of us actually had a chance to reflect on that? And if you've never had the time or space, then I would say it's a time to create it. The first step is to, first comes awareness, then comes choice, right? I hear this voice in my head. I don't like it. What am I going to do about it?
Absolutely. So, finally, just before we finish, what does personal growth look like when someone begins to move beyond their limiting beliefs and start to work with their strengths?
Hmm. It looks so inspiring. I'm actually like now having goosebumps as I'm thinking about people and how we become a whole human being. It's almost like when we are within our type and we are stuck in it. And when you
Mhm.
work in a way with yourself where you accept yourself and you accept your limitations and you are seeing yourself objectively, or again, not fully objective, but as objectively as you can, and you're working with your strengths, you are doing something different, we start to kind of get our color back and we start loving life. Like if you think about, little kids laugh, I think there was a research 120 times a minute. Adults laugh once every 3 hours on a good day. That's because we've sucked joy out of our lives by not being our full selves. So it's it's really about joy. It's about vitality. It's about holding my space in a not a zero sum game, right? So when we're in our type, it's a zero sum game. If I win, you lose.
Mm.
It's one or another. When we are in the space of kind of higher consciousness, we can see that we all will be better if we all are better. And so there's a generosity, there's color, there's vitality, and I make decisions that are better for me. And even if I'm wrong, it's also okay because I'm not going to beat myself up for making the wrong decision because I'm a human. So there's a lot of joy and beauty, and you're just a better person, like everywhere. A better parent, a better supportive human being, and you're starting to see talents in others that you wouldn't have seen from the space of your type if you're really confined in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how liberating and free that would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The guy Gurdjieff, who brought Enneagram to the Western world in 1920s, he literally like talked about liberation. Like this whole movement of Gurdjieff is about liberation. So it's
Mm.
quite fitting that you brought in this word in the last couple of minutes because that's what it is about. It's about
Cool.
freedom and liberation. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thanks for spending your time with us. And I'm sure our listeners will get in touch with you if they want to know more
Yes,
about
please.
Enneagram.
As you might have noticed, I love talking about the Enneagram, and it really comes from seeing change in people and teams and even organizations when people genuinely start thinking about themselves as
Yeah.
full human beings. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so get in touch with me there, and life is so beautiful when we allow ourselves to enjoy it with our whole selves. So I really, really wish for all of us to have this more enriching experiences and fuller fuller lives. Yeah,
Great. Thank you, Julia.
you're
Nice to
most
have you with
welcome.
us.
Thank you, Mick.